So as our last example, at least in this course, for strength, muscular endurance and power training, we're going to have a look at the concept down here of plyometrics or plyometric training, plyometrics. And of course, if I just take you back up briefly, really, with the plyometrics example, other than the circuits and the free weights, we're really addressing this concept of power or elastic strength. So please understand that first of all. Plyometrics is really great for developing elastic strength. In fact, let's actually write this in. It's really great at developing power, elastic strength, which can be very closely related to a concept of power. And I'd even mention the concept of agility here, and certainly the concept of speed. So this methodology kind of is effective, depending on how it's done, of course, it's effective for all of these sorts of things. I mean, just bear in mind that with agility, we'd need to be including things like change of direction, right? Because otherwise it kind of, if it's all linear, all in one line, one direction, then maybe it's not so relevant for the agility. But key takeaways: power and elastic strength. All right, that's first of all. The main point I want to address with you is the concept of eccentric, then concentric contractions. And you might be thinking, James, what is that? Well, let me explain. Any plyometric movement has to follow a basic principle. Okay, so I'm gonna address this principle first on Sharapova. She's using this medicine ball. This medicine ball has probably come in here. It's bounced here, and she's caught the medicine ball somewhere like here, right? So at that point, this heavy object, this could be a few kilos, this medicine ball, okay, this heavy object, it's bounced, it's gone into her hands, and effectively her arms would have started here, and they've kind of cushioned the impact of receiving that ball. I'm sure you can understand this. If someone throws you a heavy medicine ball and you catch it, it kind of keeps going and it kind of works your arms as you slow it down and you decelerate it. Well, of course, what's happening here is that the muscles in her back, for example, in her shoulder, they are cushioning the impact of that catch. And they are both working during that phase, so they're contracting, but they're also lengthening. Okay, so the muscles are working, but they're also lengthening. Well, this is what we mean by an eccentric contraction. The muscles are contracting, but as they're contracting, they're lengthening. Okay, it's like lowering yourself from a pull-up bar or lowering yourself into a push-up. The tricep in the push-up is working, but it's lengthening at the same time. Okay, now if we then throw the ball, so the ball then is thrown back out and arced in this way, that is now the muscle working and shortening. And that is what we call a concentric contraction. And the point we'd make is between these two types of contractions, we want there to be no stillness. So as soon as it's caught, it's thrown back out. Let me give you another example. This performer here is going from this drop box to this depth jump and is dropping onto the floor. As they land on the floor, their quadricep muscle is working and lengthening. And then they jump up and land on the next one, and now the quadricep is working and shortening. In other words, it's eccentric followed by concentric. So any movement which follows that pattern, medicine balls, depth jumps, drop boxes, hurdles, bounding, press-up claps, all of these sorts of things, it's eccentric contraction followed by concentric contraction. In fact, let me put this in for you, a couple of examples. So what do we mean by this? We are talking about examples of bounding. And again, I hope you're going to experience these, not just listen to me describe them, but we're talking about bounding. Let's also add in the term there, rebounding. Okay, I think that's a really important term to use, rebounding. We're talking about the use of medicine balls. So you might have looked at medicine balls and thought, what are these for? Medicine balls. I'd also sort of say kettle weights as well, because they're good for kind of swinging and slowing down. And the other time we see this a lot is with things like hurdles, because we have to land from the hurdles and bound again. So okay, that should hopefully make sense for us. I also want to address with you that this methodology is really something we should be considering to use with athletes. We're not really going to consider this, for example, with the elderly, the very young, because it is very high intensity. So let me write that in there. It is very high intensity. Okay, very high intensity. So on that basis, we're looking to work with this methodology with athletes in particular. And a couple of last points before I look at strengths and weaknesses. I would often say that with plyometrics, you can make it very sport specific. Okay, and I'm going to use a term here, sport specific explosive power. So whether we are a games player, a sprinter, whether we are an invasion game or a combat sports person, we're looking at specific development of explosive power for that environment. But on the negative, it can cause DOMS, or delayed onset of muscle soreness. So it can cause the soreness, and you might have experienced this if you've done plyometric exercises, having not exercised in a little while. It can cause some soreness in the body, okay, or DOMS. Now, let's get formally to our advantages and disadvantages. It is brilliant for developing elastic strength, plyometrics. So if kind of power is a central feature of the sport that you play or your athletes play, this is really an essential way of training in the right conditions. The other point I like about this is it's whole body. You know, we often focus on the legs with plyometrics, but it can be used for the core, and it can be used, as seen with Sharapova here, for the upper body also. On the negative, we can talk about, again, that concept of contraindication. And let me just be clear, what I mean by that is it can do more harm than good. So to come back to that soreness, it's not something you want to do the night before a big performance, for example, a big match. And the other thing is it does really dictate a need for rest. Okay, in other words, because it's very high intensity, you really need to follow this up with rest, relaxation sessions, stretching sessions after this as well, so that recovery is as high quality as possible. Now, that's not necessarily weakness if it's done properly, but of course in the real world it's not always done properly. Thanks for listening.